Google is a big deal. Of course, I don't take it lightly. My family didn't take it lightly. It was a big. We didn't have time to think or react or consider. Right? It was like take the shot or it's gonna go away. Right? So in a way, it was better that we didn't have time to overthink. Right. We could have overthought the heck out of it. Right?
After you were talking to Google in between, we started talking.
Yeah,
Conversation.
Namrata was there, and I was so. Of course, like every other designer, I wanted to end up in one of the big five companies, right?
Right.
Just, I mean, I think it's more than that. It's more about it's. Yes, I am not going to lie. I think having such a big name on the resume helps a lot in building your brand or even being recognized in the community and even all the external aspects of it, right? But I think internally, um, we don't know the scale until we see the scale, and it's the amount, the number of zeros behind metrics are staggering. And uh, I had heard of it. I had heard of the scale and scope of challenges, but I'd never seen it firsthand, right? So um, the main motivation was okay, how do I go work on even bigger products or the products that I actually have always used and have dreamt of one day working on them. So Maps was, of course, one of the most revolutionary products we have in last decade and a half, right? Really behavior shaping products, right? Like people are traveling more, people are traveling independently more because Google Maps is there. Back in the days, people had to go through an agency or like a travel supplier to actually plan their trips because there is no other way to know what places you should go to. And so almost opening up that information layer on top of our planet,
Yeah.
was
Really
was,
a new layer.
was fascinating. And having used Google products, of course, I wanted to someday end up in something like that. And my rough goals were either Google Photos or Search or Maps. So first step was to get into Google, right? And Namrata helped out. Like she referred me, and everything went great. I joined her team, and right after I joined the team, she moved to the US. um, Great planning. But yeah, I worked here for a year. I worked on the enterprise product. So it was a bit of a challenge to like wrap my head around being thrown into the world of enterprise software, just because again I had very limited understanding of the challenges there. But a very important shift happened through my time working on the product. Was I started appreciating the challenges a lot of the enterprise product that I was working on in Google, right? And almost to the point where I found a lot more method to the madness than I find in consumer products.
Right.
Because there is a lot of noise in the signal that you get from users. Just because users have varied personalities and behaviors and contexts that is hard to model into an effective framework. In enterprise, it's much more limited. The challenges are finite, and the considerations are finite, and which means that the whole challenging aspect of designing something shifts from infinite explorations to finite explorations, and within those, like the really tough challenge, the really tough sort of trade-offs that you have to make within that finite scope, right? So one could argue that then it becomes easier, but I would almost argue against that. Is that it's simpler in like how random you can go in the solutions you would explore, but it's not simple in how you would still empathize and learn the world of your customers.
Right.
It is still incredibly hard because you would have really big contracts from individual clients,
Right.
because they're enterprise clients and they're paying really big money for the software that they're buying from you, which means they have custom demands, which means they have bespoke requirements that you would have to negotiate them with, right? So those aspects you don't appreciate until you get into that kind of a work environment where building the lowest common denominator features is not enough. You need to then also, which is why we see a lot of enterprise software going in the direction of tiered offerings, because You need to create those slices, the tiers, because not everybody needs everything, and not everybody is willing to pay a flat amount of money for features that they will not use. So you need to segment them out. And how do you segment them out? How do you think of tiers in features? For example, like certain feature is required by a certain client in a very lightweight way. They just need it to work, and certain clients require that feature to work in a very complex and advanced way. So that complexity spectrum of individual features, those kinds of challenges would be very interesting, and you wouldn't see that in consumer software, right? You would basically be offering one thing and one thing only. So that angle to enterprise software was very, very interesting, and which made development slow but very considered, but a lot more fun. And I wish I had, again, I wish I had appreciated it more. I now do, right? Like, I have a massive respect for people who work in enterprise software. That's not easy. Executing is incredibly hard, and as designers, we are also sort of pinned against factors that are outside of our control. For example, delivering delivering features even in a broken situation oftentimes is needed just because you want to win a contract, or just because you want to win against a certain competitor, right? Because the contracts are very, very lucrative, and you don't want to let a client go. So oftentimes you would sacrifice quality for faster delivery, and that happens all the time. Not even all the companies do it, right? Like Microsoft, you would see, like, this is why enterprise software oftentimes ends up with a very weak foundation, because the foundation that was created to launch the 0 to 1 had to be fast and scrappy. And which is why they create a lot more tech debt than consumer products. It's because just the complexity of iterations and layerings that happen subsequently are just that much complex, and
And
that
you
varied.
can't change it now, because now there are like 5 clients on contract using it. They've trained their staff, so you better not change anything. So once the foundation is put in place, it's very hard to remove that debt in enterprise as well.
There are two aspects to it. One is that it's very hard to train. So for a client who you are selling your software to, it's very hard for them to train their employees to work and be good at your software. Now, if you change things, you are incurring them additional training costs, because they now have to teach them again, and they now have to train them again, which are not inexpensive. They probably oftentimes also outsource those contracts. So it's this whole mesh in the industry that you have to understand before you push out changes that are drastic or like revolutionary, right? Like ripping the band-aid is not the way to do it in enterprise, and which is why we oftentimes see controlled opt-ins to like new experiences, and while some of the clients would still be on old experiences because they're used to that and things like that. The other aspect is that it's basically like latency is a big factor, and downtime is another big variable in like how you deliver software, right? The contracts that you make with these companies have very, very stringent uptime requirements. So if you mess something up and if your software goes down, you're hurting other clients do their businesses. So you not only are you are losing money yourself, you're making them lose money. So it's literally you have them by their performance, right? So you can't really you many times are not in a situation to be taking those calls without, which is why we see it all the time, right? Hey, we will be doing a scheduled maintenance on a Sunday night for 2 hours, right? Our servers will be down. Those are planned weeks in advance, because you can't give them a day's notice and just because you want to ship a feature, right? They didn't ask for it. So yeah, those two factors make it very difficult to be a little aggressive about shipping. It's very measured, considered. We have like direct lines of communication with the clients. We are constantly talking with them, right? Hey, these are the changes we're bringing. What do you think about them? So there's a lot of that kind of those dynamics do come in the picture. Not so much in consumer though.
What is the culture of Google like? And is there a cultural difference between like the Bangalore office and the different all the? I think you've been to a bunch of offices by now. You've been working remotely.
Yeah.
So what is the cultural differences like, and how is Google as in cultural experience?
In culture, I would break it down into saying that Google almost is so large that it's a collection of companies.
Right.
And your version of the so yes, the culture bar is incredibly high. Like it's the kinds of people you meet is phenomenal. Like one of the things that I realized in the early days in Google was, I think the biggest benefit you have in working in a company like Google is the access you get to the kinds of people that you get an access to that you wouldn't get otherwise, right?
Google itself is filled with like awesome, phenomenal people who
Yeah.
are like legendary in various industries.
Yeah, and you find somebody new every time, every now and then, right? So it's an incredibly large company, and we have people who are extremely opinionated, extremely point of view driven, very very smart people who have done things, who have been here for decades. So that still fascinates me, right? So that was the biggest sort of almost a happy culture shock for me, right? Like, hey, now I have access to these people, I better maximize it, right? Like, I better use it and leverage that in the best way possible. So other than that, I think every team has their own subculture. So yes, Google has like this all mega culture of having so many smart and opinionated people under one roof, and then you have these still smaller but yet still very large teams spread out all over the world, from people full of people with diverse backgrounds and diverse educational backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, skill sets, and opinions. So that almost then decides the kind of experience you have of the subculture you partake in. So search has like its own really fun subculture. Photos is like a very small team, they have their own subculture. Enterprise had its own subculture. So every time you sort of get used to a new team, you realize a lot of things are the same, but a lot of things are also very different. And that's kind of the beauty of Google, right? It's you have very different experiences based on where you work and who you work with. But I think I've seen in search at least there is a lot of institutionalized knowledge that exists in Google search, simply because we still have people in the company, the core people who actually made search what search is today, right? And they have been here for decades, and then they are some of the most well articulated thought leaders that I oftentimes get a chance to listen to. When you're in that kind of an environment, you get overwhelmed, right? Like it's very humbling to be able to routinely walk on your campus and walk by somebody who's done things, that you aspire to do in 2 decades. So that's very humbling, and yet you do slowly internalize it. You do get used to it. I definitely see. So there is always genius around you, and you are in awe of it in the beginning, but later you realize that genius is just doing the time. I think doing the time in the industry. I think yes, there are other variables, but the biggest one is just putting time in it, right? So if you have spent thinking about a problem for years and years and years, you now basically have seen the problem evolve as much as your understanding evolve, which means you are now that much smarter, or your mental models are that much richer, and that's when you basically stop being in awe of it and being in appreciation of it for being consistent at throwing themselves at the problems.
So it's not luck, it's just literally they have worked on, they've like put their head against the problem so long that it looks like whatever they think is genius because they know ins and outs of the problem so well.
Yeah, I think there is, of course, like there's a little bit of the genius of just being incredibly smart and that, but I think majority of it is still about doing the time. And when you come across somebody who has done their time, they just speak a different language. They just speak. They no longer speak in absolutes. They always think in terms of possibilities and market forces and forces that govern the externalities of the problem space and the internalities of it. Right, your company is evolving, problems are evolving, users are evolving, the market is evolving. So in such a complex world, they have somehow made peace with the complexities and ambiguities and volatility, right? And that aspect is very soothing to see, and that can only come with time and maturity and a certain level of almost zen-like calmness, right? Like you never think about complexity, ambiguity in terms of something that you will eventually win over, or even get a hold of. It's something that you just learn to appreciate and make peace with. That's the only way to deal with them, because those are forces that are outside of your control, governed by variables that you don't even know exist. Like, for example, how the market is going to behave. You don't even know what other factors are playing into the behavior of the market, right? Because complexity and there's this term called VUCA, right? I don't know if you know it, right? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So all those four forces just keep moving on their own terms. You can control a little bit of that, but you can never basically command them, or you can never sort of have like a full control over them. So just learn to appreciate and learn to make peace with it, right? It's just the law of nature. Like complexity is a law of nature. It's the scale in which the company operates. It's always going to be complex. There will never be simple projects and simple things. The world we are living in, it has more people than we've had ever before. It has more companies than we've had ever before, right? And more opinions than we've had ever before. More connections, more network effects, and more effects we don't foresee or we can't predict. So it's which means all of this rubs off on the culture, right? Like the culture now, you see, for example, if you talk to anybody, there's almost this passive appreciation for like, yeah, it's tough, like there are no easy problems in search, like just because it's a simple product, it's not an easy product, right? And there's a distinction. It's simple, which is why it's very hard and difficult.
It is the bread and butter of Google, and to be able to. So how does the team feel about making mistakes? Because A, you work, like I said, work on the bread and butter of the company. B, the scale is like huge, and the variables complexity, like I said, ambiguity is huge. Most organizations at that scale would not even reach that scale, because as the scale increases, you start to slow down, right? So how do you in the team keep room for experimentation and failure? And B, then what is the generic mindset of people? Like, how do you prevent people from being afraid of trying something new or coming up with an idea? How does that work?
Internally, it's a very, very mature organization that values creativity of problem solving and acknowledges that ideas can come from anywhere, right? From the lowest of the lowest layers to like the highest layer, right? And the culture is set up in a way where everybody has a voice. Everybody can throw ideas and into consideration, and then there is a discussion around it, right? So it's a very experiment first culture for sure. I don't think at scale there is any other way to execute things at such a scale. You have to experiment. So like you have to fail in a village in order to succeed in the country, right? So if you can't fail in the small scale, you would never be able to experiment, which is and all of these have been considered years ago, and now we have like a very mature framework in place to be able to experiment with any kinds of possibilities that you want to experiment with. So we experiment all the time, right? Like any other company like Booking, or any other company like Microsoft, any other consumer company that wants to like affect change at scale, they always experiment, and there is always a large number of experiments ongoing, and you're always learning, and you're always finding out behavior at scale. But at the same time, there is of course the qualitative aspect to it, right? You're always plugged into like the moving needs of the world, right? Like the moving, shifting information needs of the world, and how sort of search as a product fits into their lives, right? Behaviors change, the needs change, the methods change, right? So being plugged into those and like always being receptive to like what's happening outside, while also thinking of like internal ideas that you can push out, right? That's sort of been the framework, and it's been very successful. I honestly am surprised by how process-driven the organization is and how efficient they are because of it. I think they have all the checks and balances in place. The right touch points are in place. Like you always find the right people that you can reach out to for help. You always have like people who can help you like make sense of things, right? Like once you run an experiment, there is always data that you want to understand and learn and find patterns from. So all of that like then makes your job either as a product manager or a designer easy to then like get a grasp of how your idea or product performed, and then you can take a very informed decision on whether you want to pursue it or not. But there is always so that's like a very mathematical aspect or mathematical method of doing it, right? And then there is always I wouldn't say emotional, but also almost perspective-driven view of executing things, right? And I strongly believe that simple and impactful products are designed by perspectives and points of views. Somebody somewhere had a point of view that access to information should be just as easy as typing in a box on a page, and they should have the access to whatever they want to know about, right? And now we have Google search, right? So it starts with something that simple, and we see that kind of entrepreneurial little paths happening inside the company all the time. Somebody comes with an idea, a certain perspective about a part of search, and then we brainstorm and we think about it, and then we test it out, and then so there's always bottom up innovation happening all the time. You have high level OKRs and you have high level directives about what we as a company or as an organization, which is as big as a company, what do we as a search organization care about, right, at a higher level. And then you always have bottom up innovation coming up. So all you need to do as a good team is to map those individual efforts into the higher level vision, and then you have like a good understanding of where you are moving as a company, right? You can do isolated experiments that are not strictly within the framework of the high level directive, but majority of the work still happens within those themes, right? You set themes, and then give freedom to people to come up with like various ideas to achieve those goals that you defined in the themes, right? So that way it's democratic, yet sort of perspective driven from the top, and also receptive to how we as Google are seen outside in the world, right? Especially now when like tech is under a lot of scrutiny, right? It's executing products in a space like search is very, it's heavily monitored. It's heavily like the results are monitored. Like we see like European Union now like being very focused on like identifying the security and the safety and the data privacy of their people, right? And now we have more governments are sort of being the awareness is now spreading wider and wider. So that almost sort of makes us reflect and think and be careful about what kind of a product are we building, right? And it's always been like a part of the mission, right, to be user first. But all these external forces also then sort of you can't ignore them, right? So all of that always comes into picture and like comes into considerations as well. Yeah.
Right. And how big is your the overall Google search team and specifically the design team in the search team?
So I can't talk numbers, but it's pretty huge. I think search collectively, the search design team is like there are a lot of things within search, right? You have like assistant. It's basically like the way we see search is access to information in any way possible. So you can have like access to information based on like query you type, which is search, but then like voice interface is another way to access information. So that's assistant. And then there is news, and then there is like Google News is like a thing, right? Trend, you have trends, and you have like
I use both of them.
yeah, and you have like fun things like Google Doodles, right? Like which are like also part of like spreading awareness about certain important things happening on the day. So there are like teams dedicated to all these things, right? So it's yes, it's a search organization, but all of these are parts of search, the bigger vision that is like access to information. So basically, like we define sort of teams in a way that makes sense in terms of shared problem statements. So like it's just because it becomes like more efficient to I think have that kind of an understanding of the problem space, not the surfaces, right? I personally work on, let's say, I work on Suggest, right? And so Suggest is something that I'm responsible for, and then there are other things that I get to influence. So Suggest is the search suggestions experience that you see as soon as you start typing a query anywhere, right? So it could be on the homepage, it could be on your Android Google app or iPhone Google app or even Chrome Omnibox, right? It's not like you're almost thinking about like search suggestions as how are suggestions used and needed by the user, instead of saying how are suggestions used on iPhone or like versus Android. Like the fundamental mechanism of Suggest is like very similar on regardless of the surfaces, right? The manifestation would of course be platform dependent. It would slightly get tweaked, sure, but the need, the core problem that Suggest is solving is the same. So that way, like basically it's me, and for other things you would have like larger teams for like larger products like Discover, or like larger products like desktop search. For example, I'm doing some work on desktop search as well, so we have like a huge desktop team which is like doing work on like multiple areas of the search results page, for example, right? Like you have image search and video search, and all of them have like their own challenges, and like the information layout and the information density and like latency, and like what kind of an experience you would serve to like a user in India or versus a user in Indonesia or Japan or USA, right? So that is when you truly need like diverse thinking and like larger teams, right? For something as confined as Suggest, which is like a heavily constrained surface, uh, basically it's just me, and I think it's been working really well. The engineering team is of course larger as it needs to be, but I personally enjoy like having a broader view of like all the surfaces that I would be thinking about, because that allows you to put some systems thinking into it, right? Like you think about feature parity, you think about different, slightly diverging needs of different users, right? For example, on a desktop, then there are like nuanced differences, and on mobile there are nuanced differences, and then latency considerations are very different on desktop and mobile. So that way your design considerations differ, but largely it is still like similar problem space. So I like sort of being the single point of contact for this. So the funny thing is, when you type a query in search, right, the way an average user suggest is they almost don't even think about that consciously, and I think that's a testament to how seamless it is, and how fast it is, and how basically natural it is to what the customer expects, or the user expects, right? So we always like think about that a lot when we think of any new features, right? Like, hey, if we don't want to lose that immediacy of Suggest, right? So, and because suddenly you don't want to have your users noticing things that they were not noticing before, just because we needed like a certain shiny feature on the page, right? It's natural, it's fast, it's very intuitive, and your glancing patterns are pre-established. So we basically think of it that way. So there is like there is a huge responsibility in like what kinds of suggestions you show, what is the expectation you set for what you will see on the results page, right? So yeah, it's a very complex space, right? Sometimes some events occur. For example, like there is a tsunami coming, and it's been given the name Sandy or something, right? If you search for Sandy within this time frame, you're not looking for Sandy the person, or you're looking for the tsunami, right? So how do we bring people faster to the information that they're looking for with minimal signal that they give us? So these are basically the challenges that you think of, right? Like how do you rank suggestions, and like what are the right touch points within those suggestions to like give the right signal to the user, hey, that's the one that you're looking for, and you go forward, right? So
there's a lot of shared understanding and shared ownership in Google, and there's a lot of encouragement and bias toward experimentation, because that's how you push the envelope forward. There's no one telling Google how to figure this out or what to do next, right? You have to figure it out on your own through these experiments. And then I think you also touched upon that it's a very process-driven organization, right? So how does design process at Google look like? Is it one set process, or does every design team come up and project come with its own process? Like how do you think at Google about design process, and what does it look like today?
So the execution is very process driven. The thinking and then coming up with like designs and coming up with like solutions to certain problems or even considerations, that is I would almost say that that is beautifully messy. That is actually there is a certain lack of structure intentionally there, which allows us to be creative about how we reach the solutions as much as what solutions we reach, right? So we try out with like a vague problem statement. We go on like double diamond, right? Like we explore a lot of solutions. We explore like a lot of directions that the problem could be considered in, and then we narrow down to what is it exactly that we want to solve, and then again that was the problem narrowing, and then you do solution narrowing, and then basically you take it forward. That I think happens through like brainstorms and discussions that you do with product manager. Something that I've actually been very reasonably successful, I wouldn't say very successful, but reasonably successful in is, and this is also full credit to like Google's culture, is that design is extremely valued. I think it's a very design first organization. It's product managers come to us with like problems all the time. And I think it's not even a situation of them coming to us. It's almost so natural. You sit with them, you work with them, you talk with them all the time. You are sort of constantly soft brainstorming in discussions all the time, right? So then sometimes you put time aside and like just go heads down at it. But you're always on top of the nerve of the team, right? Like what are the problems we're actually struggling with right now? What are the things that we are right now heavily thinking about? So you are thinking as much as somebody else is thinking, which means those diamonds are already taking shape, right? Like you just don't put a process to it. You don't force them. You basically organically let the process take its course, and at some point you have something to basically take to leadership and have a discussion about it, right? So that way I really enjoy not having a lot of enforced structure on it. Sure, you could do that, but then like I don't think that's how creative processes work. That's not you can't time box or force creativity.
Right.
You almost have to be not intentional about it.
Right.
It almost happens subconsciously, right? So you would be thinking about a problem for a few days, nothing happens, and on one day you suddenly have an epiphany, and like you have like 3 different ways of doing it, right?
Right.
And there is a beauty to it that it would be very bad if we killed it with enforcing a structure.
Right.
Like, hey, today we are going to brainstorm, and today we need to come up with a few solutions.
And you have to do it today itself because there is a
Yes,
deadline
because
on
tomorrow the other triangle starts, right?
Right.
Like today, it's the first triangle is happening today, guys, whether we like it or not. Yeah, that's yeah.
You spoke about execution is more structured,
Yeah.
right? And given that you association is like worldwide, multiple products, right? The association exists, multiple format exist in so much device and platform fragmentation, language and behavior fragmentation. So how do you make sure when you're shipping, how do you testing, how do you collaborate, how does the handoff happen, right? Is there like a back and forth between engineering and design, asking questions? So how does that structured execution part of the process look like?
Yeah. So when you're designing a solution to the problem, you of course would go wild exploring solutions, right? But at some point you do have to bring it back and sort of almost connect it with reality, right? And I say connect with reality because you do want freedom of exploration, but you also want sort of a realistic execution plan, right? So that connection, when you draw that connection, you come up with a plan of where do we want to get to and how are we going to get there. And purposefully keeping where we want to get to vague allows us to pivot as needed, because where we want to get to, again, it's a pipe dream. Like we made it up yesterday, right? So we don't know whether we actually want to get there, or the series of steps that we take to get there probably would force us to pivot elsewhere,
Right.
as we go forward, right? So you purposefully keep it vague, vague enough that allows you to right now have a tangible plan, but also enough freedom for you to pivot if needed, right? So once you have that kind of a plan in place, you basically just then set up time with the leadership, and then you get their guidance, right? Hey, what do you feel about this? Keeping future direction vague also allows you to get a more amicable buy-in from the leadership, because the leadership's sole job is to basically not pin you in a certain direction so that we're all not able to change things in the future. So the only directive all the time consistently from them is make sure you are listening, make sure you are sort of conducive to feedback, launch something, launch, learn, right? So make sure you're learning that you would learn from whatever you ship right now would help you, or would at least not force you to then not be able to do anything about pivoting if need. And from like the core execution side of things, I sit next to my engineers. That's how the team is set up. So we have basically a conversation. There is like the handoff is that I share like the link of Figma. Like Figma is always shared with them. So honestly, like they don't have to ask me for it. Like the first thing I did was like organize everything into projects so that they can find things at any time that they need, right? So I could be sitting here right now, and if the engineer needs access to the mocks, it's always there, right? So yeah, I send them the link. Hey, this is where the files are, and I keep explorations and the experimental candidates in one file. So like, yeah, I just split them into pages. So like you would because that way, like everything is still siloed enough that I can make localized changes without having to touch all the files. So like I could have exploration. So I keep like a page named Sketchpad, and then in that Sketchpad page is my graveyard for like everything that has been considered, right? And I use that to create design artifacts to socialize ideas. So I pick up things from there and like share them out. But once we have some sort of a plan forward, that's and containment of ideas, that's when I put them in another page and just name it as like potential candidates, and those are the ones we would build. So then the engineer exactly knows like the scope of what they need to work on. So yeah, that's basically the handoff. It's a very tap on the shoulder and hey, here's the link, like let's talk about it. Do you see anything looking off? Everything's fine. Yeah, show me when you have built it and we can have a discussion, right? Like, so once they're ready with like a demo or something, we sit and like we fine tune the details and like make sure everything is like polished and the UI polish is there, the execution polish is there, and that way it's very startup-y, and I enjoy that. I think if I had to go through like a process for doing all of that, that would be very cumbersome. I think process should only be there when it's needed. I think it should support the free exploration and free spirit of building products, not as you said, enforce it to the extent where you can't even think of new ideas or extend the time you want to give to thinking just because your structure demands that you come to a conclusion by the end of the day. That's I think too much. And any good creative professional will tell you that and you know that, right? Like it's that's not how you solve problems. The epiphanies are important and they happen at random times, and you sometimes identify patterns when you're working on something completely different, right? Like it's going on in your head, a certain problem, you see something else and you immediately draw like a very connection at a very deeper level, and you suddenly have that moment, and then everything changes, right? So I send new ideas and mocks when they come to my product manager all the time, at even in the evening after hours, like, hey, this thing came to mind, like check this out, what do you feel about it? And if they're online, then we would have like a mini brainstorm over chat, you know. So that way I enjoy it a lot, and I think we should keep that. We should preserve that little bit of messiness to building things, because it's that's the natural way of building things, I guess. Things will be messy, your desk will be messy, right?
Creative process is very messy, I think,
Yeah.
psychologically and like in many socially, and in many ways we can't structure it. But documentation is still very important, not just from, and especially as the organization grows larger.
Yeah.
Right, documentation becomes critical, even though there may not be a lot of structure to a process. And what is your approach to it, and why is it so hard, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think documentation is almost the need of the scale of the organization, right? In small companies, ideas and like thoughts and like new ways of thinking exist purely sort of in the ether, of in the air. It's almost like you overhear somebody talking about something, and then 5 other people talk about it, and then suddenly like on the floor, that's the thinking. But when you have multiple floors and multiple buildings and multiple teams working with different priorities and different problems and different timelines, you can no longer expect that kind of a zeitgeist to propagate through the organization enough. So what is your way of then establishing a shared understanding, or even propagating or spreading out or socializing your work? The only way to do it is to document it, right? And many times we have deep brainstorms where you really think long and hard about certain problems, and there's a lot of verbal material that gets spoken about, or that gets discussed in the meeting, right? That's high value, right? Oftentimes you resolve complexities and conflicts in a meeting and then arrive at a conclusion, which means you executed a certain process which was to unlock complexities and arrive at a certain solution, but that was all verbal, so you lost it, right? Like there is nobody was there to take notes or document it. So as a designer, how do you establish that sort of narrative around the outcome that you have produced, right? Yes, you can share the outcomes, that's the easy part, like sharing a bunch of mocks is not difficult, but if mocks are your only output, you are doing a disservice to what value you bring to the table. And this is something I've internalized ever since I joined Google, simply by looking at how other designers did it in Google, right? And this is by no means my own invention. I just learned it from how other more mature senior designers did it at the time. And I have been doing it, and it's been the single most highest leverage activity that I do in my career, right? It's to always be documenting, right? I think the reason why most people don't do it is because it takes time, and also they don't have a set sort of personal process for it. And my process is like very simple. I every Thursday I dedicate an hour on basically just going heads down, making notes for everything happening that week or everything that has happened that week, right? No reason for it being a Thursday. You could do it on a Monday. I just find Thursdays to be a little quiet for me, and Thursdays are at that point in the week where a lot.
Never knew Fridays.
Yeah, and yes, and most of the things have already happened that are supposed to happen that week. So you have material to which is fresh in your head. You can write about it. But if you write it on Monday, you might have already you lose the fidelity, right? So I don't want to lose that. So Thursday seemed natural.
So I had a long tweet thread about what other things you encourage designers to do to get better, right? You spoke about meeting different kind of people and connecting with people offline and just not silo yourself onto Twitter and stuff. So A, what does a personal process look like, and what can designers do to improve? Learn from your process too.
Yeah, I think for somebody who's not done this, I would highly encourage that they develop like sort of like a personal identity in the community, right? Like who you are and what kind of work you do. There is no way of all of that to come out unless you give it some vehicle to come out, right? There's some outlet for it to come out. And when you don't have that, that's something you should work on then, right? It's important not only because you want to build a personal brand, but also because you know people who talk about their work, you know people who get talked about, right, for their work. And we need more faces who are championing their own work with pride in the community, right? And we don't have them enough. It's not only for you, it's also for the community, right? You are enriching the community with your experiences, with your learnings, and with your sort of career trajectory of whatever you have done and who you are today, right? As you know, right? I used to write on Medium, and I published like a couple of articles. I still get messages today about somebody finding out that article and them finding it useful, right? So you don't know how far and wide your content goes and how many people it touches, right? Which is the beauty of the internet, right? And it's such a broadcast medium. You throw it out once, and thousands of people will see it. Hopefully, I'm sure people understand the value in doing it. They just don't do it because maybe there is no time. They fear the curation. They fear that people will judge them or whatever, right? So whatever their reasons are, but I wish more of them did that. We need more voices, and we need more role models. We need more aspirational figures that can inspire more people, right? And that can help the community. And so this is something that they should start doing from early on when they are vulnerable and when they are actually starting out, so that you basically hold yourself accountable and also start like basically growing in public, right? And when you grow in public, other people know that it's possible, and it is doable. It is within reach if you just put the time to it. And talk about the challenges more, right? Yeah, everybody goes through the same challenges. Every company has the same challenge. It's you may think that you are in a certain startup and you're facing certain challenges, but tomorrow magically when you join Google, everything will be all right, and you will no longer have those challenges. I tell you what, the challenges remain the same. The people change, right? And perspectives change. The challenges, as I said, complexities and those things don't go away. They are always going to be there. But what is interesting is how you change your point of view to those challenges, right? Like how you change your outlook to those challenges,
Right.
and some way for you to share that to the community, so that they also learn from your internal view of what things look like from these different companies and experiences and building the different products, right? So those stories need to come out. I think I wish that would happen more, and that's what I would tell designers, right? Like just share your story. You don't know who you would be elevating and who's reading. So always don't assume that other people have said it already, so I don't need to say it. Maybe you have a unique spin on it, right? So that matters. And I think, as I said, perspectives are what basically move companies, products, people forward. So every perspective matters, and we also need unpopular opinions. We need extreme opinions as well. I think they should not be opposed or like
not silenced. I mean,
they should not be suppressed. Yeah, absolutely. And even in design, you could have, for example, I was reading somewhere where there was an opinion piece where somebody was arguing for a future where product managers and designers are just one person, and they are called product owners or whatever, right? So if somebody tweeted that out, like today's situation would basically bash them on the head with it, right? Like they would never hear the end of it. They would never hear the end of it, right? But if you listen and if you consider what they have to say, there is some truth to it, right? Like there are no absolute wrongs and rights. There is always a spectrum. So, and which is why there is value, right? In hearing people out.
You telling your parents, hey, I'm going to join Google. Like, what was their reaction like?
So, of course, if you ask my dad, mom or dad, or even Shachi to an extent to describe what I do, they won't be able to fully describe it, right? And I try to like not bore them with my stupid details anyways. I like to have a life that is not about tech, right? So I purposefully don't discuss any of that. But yeah, anecdotally, I think my mom was like super happy, right? And dad was always, he always had faith, right? That I would make it work. But yeah, Google is a big deal. Of course, I don't take it lightly. My family didn't take it lightly. It was a big deal in the family, and
but a celebration one day phone call from relatives, हमारे बच्चे का bill लगवा दो, etc.
Yeah, so you do become sort of you become an example, right? And
the career comes throughout the family as well.
Yeah, that happened, right? Like it was a really fun moment for all of us. Like they were all elated, and my dad is still like extremely satisfied with like the growth that I've gone through, thankfully, and the hard work that I'm putting in, right? So, of course, for example, in our case, like when our kid go and explore some career like, I don't know, YouTube influencer or TikTok influencer, we would be highly skeptical, right? But once the money starts rolling in, it's all fine, beta, right? Like
you figured it out.
Yeah, you're on your own, and now I know you're on your own.
Now you can't ask for pocket money.
Now it's done, right? It's basically you own your actions, right? And once that happens, you can see it in their eyes, right? Like that they now are relieved. It's a lot of relief, and it's also a lot of it starts with relief, and then gradually it turns into like respect and admiration, right? That not only did you establish a career, but you are getting good at it, and you're growing within the career, right? So yes, Google was a big deal in reinforcing that with parents.
How do you keep them like? You said like you're smart enough to keep them like. But how does it work? Like, how do I convince my parents? Because most parents do not understand the world we live in.
Yeah.
Right. That why having a website is important is damn hard to explain.
Yeah.
Right. The chicken before the egg problem.
Yeah.
Etc. So how do you talk to what worked for you talking to your parents about these things?
That if I try to remember, I was in a situation where I wanted to pursue something in technology, and I didn't even frame it as a design position. It was almost like there is this product company that are building this finance product in Bangalore, and they like my work. Now, what is the work? I don't know, right? Like they like my work, and they have invited me for like to join them in Bangalore. So my dad said, okay, what does the company do? Is it like a good? Because honestly, like I was an engineer, and for an engineer to fit inside a tech company doesn't sound too far-fetched. Yeah. So like, yeah, you're an engineer. Maybe you're just going to be a developer, right? And my dad, for some reason, always saw me as a developer. He also, I now remember, like in a couple of conversations with his friends, he used to say like, oh yeah, he's an engineer. He's a software developer. He builds software. I was fine with it. I guess, yeah, in a way you could say that.
Right.
It's not too far. So yeah, that's basically like it didn't sound at the time too different from what my education was. Of course, it was too different, but it happened so fast in like a span of a couple of days. As I said, like we didn't have time to think or react or consider. Right? It was like take the shot or it's gonna go away. Right? So in a way, it was better that we didn't have time to overthink.
Right.
We could have overthought the heck out of it, right? And
so
it's
don't
better.
give time to your parents to do any of that.
Buy the next ticket. Buy the next ticket you can with your dad's credit card. Grab the OTP, whatever you can.
And go.
Get the hell out of there. and then don't talk to them until you send them the picture of the first paycheck, and then you won't have to explain, you won't have to rationalize.
All explanation is done.
That's done. Yeah, 6 figures, it's all good. I'm doing well, I have my own place. That's all they care for.
Right.
They want you to be happy, right? Like they want you to have a career, and they want you to be satisfied with the career. So I was privileged enough that where my parents did not want to have a lot of oversight. All they cared for was like I get good education and good exposure, and they ensured that. So beyond that, it was all about we did our part, now you do yours, right? So when I moved to Bangalore, I still remember Sampad's line, right? I told him upfront, hey, I'm married, and he wouldn't let me hear the end of it, right? Kept reminding me that I said that. So I was married before, when I moved to Bangalore, and which meant that it was a new experience for both of us. She didn't know what I was signing up for. I didn't know what I was signing up for. But she knew that I was enjoying my work and I was learning a lot, right? So she just had faith in me, and she let me do whatever I wanted. I am almost. I'm going to be honest and say that I oftentimes took advantage and like prioritized work for at the sacrifice of personal life. I shouldn't have done that, but she was very. She basically gave me like a free will at doing whatever I needed to do to ensure that I had a good success. And in the initial days, I didn't even I hadn't even proven myself, right? Like I was still like in the early days, like a lot of doubt, self-doubt, a lot of doubt that she had on me, valid, right? Like she didn't even know that I would be able to do this new job that I was invited to. So that's why she basically gave me like, okay, do whatever you have to. Let's make sure that we get to stay here and we build a career and optimize for that, nothing else. So that was extremely responsible and very helpful of her to do that. And yeah, after Instamojo, I think through subsequent jobs, I also tried to like control it heavily and like try to balance it out, and that's my way of sort of paying her back, right, for the trust that she showed. And now like I make sure I shut down all kinds of work after work hours as much as possible until needed, right? Like I don't even work in the evenings anymore, and basically carve out intentionally time for family, talk to my parents as much as I can. I mean, when you live far away, right, that's all they ask for is to like hear your voice every other day, and know that you are fine and you're eating well and you're taking care of yourself and your family and your wife, right?
Generally, like where do you see design as a profession going, and should, if I'm considering, if I'm student watching, should I consider design as a career, and what will tell me that if I should consider it or not? Where does this go? Where does this lead in the future?
Yeah, predicting innovation is always difficult, but I do see that uh, thinking about how the world works at the moment and how what are the forces that are pushing the world forward, right? For example, why did we see the rise of video apps on mobile, right? And Instagrams and Snapchats and now TikTok, right? It's because the core assumption was that people have a lot of free time while they go to work or while they were like the tiny moment fillers, right? Like you have thousands of tiny moments every single day, and all you need in that time is to get entertained or just like have like a tiny burst of fun in that moment. So that was tackled by these products, right? Now, what is that next thing that is going to be the new emerging behavior, right? And you try and read a lot. You try and read like analysts like Benedict Evans and like strategy like Ben Thompson. You try and find out how those analysts are looking forward and like looking at the movement of the world, right? Because you won't be it's their job to do that, and they have like a very good synthesized version of the outlook to the movement of the world. So that way you can then start thinking about what kind of products will be required, right? Are we all going to be mobile? Are we all going to be desktop? Is that going to be like a third device? Is wearable going to be a thing, right? For example, then you read about companies pushing new products and new formats in the world, right? Now watch is a thing. Now AirPods are a thing.
Right.
Will there be, let's say, like an AirPods app store tomorrow, for example, because you want voice-driven apps, you want like translator app inside of your AirPods, you want wayfinding apps in your AirPods, you want like a gym instructor in your AirPods. So
It's endless. Literally.
it is endless, yeah. And for example, like you want auto record functionality, you want like
Transcription.
transcription, ambience recording, or like replaying your physical world. You know, you could go nuts, right? And the more you think about these things, you don't need to immediately like start building stuff or go crazy at like explorations. You just need to keep listening to the market and know and acknowledge where it's going, right? Just so that you don't miss out. Um, there was a tweet yesterday, very interesting tweet, that everything everything that gets invented when between your age of 15 to 35 is something you can build a career on and something you can pick up. Everything that gets invented after you are 35, you basically will feel that that's something that the cool kids use, and that's not never going to catch on, and that's you aging, not the product.
Right.
The imposter syndrome that you're feeling today will be the lowest amount of imposter syndrome that you will feel in the rest of your life. It's always going to go up.
That's not hopeful at all.
Exactly. But that's the point I'm making, right? That the bigger challenges you work on, the bigger things you work on, the smarter people you work with, and the more famous or like more proven people you work with, you will feel like a fraud all the time, and even more so than you used to feel before, right? But because it's almost you learn to deal with it basically. Like and I'm saying this, like, who am I to say this, right? Like I listen to people like Katie Dill and like people like Bobby Nath, who is a VP of design and search, right? And like they speak to this thing all the time that it doesn't go away, it only amplifies, and you just learn that imposter syndrome is not a designer specific thing. It's every profession, right? Like, can I handle
every creative profession?
Anything, right? Like, can I handle these challenges? Or it's almost like saying if you have always driven a Honda your whole life and you're given a Porsche, and then you suddenly are like, am I a real driver? Am I capable of driving this?
Right.
You're never capable of doing anything, right? You just figure it out for the time you have here, right? And it's just like, yes, I know this is not a good answer, but I think you will realize why this is not a good answer when you do the time and you reach at that stage. You will realize that there is no answer. It's just one of the constants, right? You will always have doubt, and I mean, everybody has doubts. Even CEOs have doubts, right? They don't know what they're doing. They don't know. The only thing they have is the access to information in order to inform their judgment. But their judgment is with the same amount of information. There are many other people who would be able to take a better judgment with the same information access, right? So it's all about maximizing your access to information so that you can hope that you can take a relatively informed decision than you would have taken. And that's one way to deal with the syndrome, I guess.
If you were to meet Hardik from 10 years ago, right, what would you tell that Hardik?
I was thinking about this question in the shower today. Because I don't want to give you... Okay, so the answer is buy a lot of Google stock, buy a lot of Amazon and Apple stocks. That's what I would tell my 10-year-old self. Yeah. Well, then I wouldn't need to. We wouldn't be doing this, right? Like we would be on an island, right, in a yacht or something. We would be chilling, right?
Okay.
We wouldn't worry about the problems of the world, problems designers face. No, I worry about problems that I face. When are we reaching the coast so I can load up on... I want to load up on my margaritas and my bar, right? So, no, I think specifically to career, I would say don't plan. And I think I still... my today's self already knows that my 10-year later self would tell this to me anyways, right? Like, don't plan. It's all like make it as you go, right? Nobody knows what they're doing. Everybody's figuring out things as they go. Some luck out at certain times, and all you need to do is maximize the purview of the experiments that you run in your life, so that some of them succeed, basically. So try as many things, meet as many people as possible. You don't know who is going to like help you out in what scenario, right? So maximize your probability of succeeding, and that's the only way to succeed in a world full of ambiguity, right? Like who knows what they're doing, or who knows who will come to the fore when you need help, right? So be nice to people. Don't dunk on people on social media. I used to do that. Stop doing it completely, right? Like, don't dunk on bad products, poor user experiences. Everybody is struggling. You are struggling as well.
Right.
you're doing bad things as well. Just be nice to people, maximize your chances, and hope, I guess.
Hope.
Don't lose hope. Yeah.
Don't plan and hope. Okay.
Don't plan and hope. Yeah, sounds very lame, right? But that doesn't mean you become passive.
Right.
That doesn't mean you stop acting.
Right.
You still need to do that maximization part. You still need to maximize your chances, and that is a very deliberate, active thing you need to do.
Right.
It's
Like,
all, you can't sit and hope
somebody will know that you are
without doing anything, right? You work hard and hope, right, that the work pays off, or the connections pay off, or the all the reaching out that you are doing
right.
would pay off. But if you don't do that, then there is no hope, right?
There are folks, there are kids in Gujarat watching right now. What would you give us something in Gujarati that we can enjoy?
So this is not a designer specific advice. This is life advice, right?
Awesome.
And we learned it from one of the most iconic movies in Bollywood. So some might already see where this is going. So yeah, this is from Munna Bhai, and the line goes, "Karam ramwanu, juice piwanu, majani life," right? The carefree attitude. This speaks to like the carefree attitude of Gujaratis, and I think it's very insightful. It's deep. I think it's deep because there is that book, right? Like Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, right?
Yes,
It's exactly that, right?
Okay, that's book in one line.
Yes, book in one line. Yeah, Karam ramwanu, juice piwanu. Like it's like eat good food, have fun, play games, and take it as it comes. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Hardik, for joining us. This was phenomenal.
Thank you for putting all the hard work. I know this is not easy. I was following your stories, and the logistics are extremely challenging. So thank you for doing that. Yeah,
This is fun, man.
This has been a lot of fun. Yeah.
And if you have any questions for Hardik, do reach out to him. He's active on Twitter. He's active on Instagram. I'm gonna link to his, both his profiles in the description. And any question you have around design, I'm thinking about getting into design. You want to intern at Google, or all sort of questions, do bombard his DM, slide into his DMs.
Should we do the like, share, and subscribe bit? So, my wife and I have been thinking about considering starting a YouTube channel, right?
Okay.
So we practice this line, right? So I'm going to say that for you.
Awesome.
So this was a lot of fun. I think Siddharth he was my first design colleague, and he actually taught me a lot in the early days of InstaMojo, along with like other extremely helpful people there in the company, right? And I think he is one of the kindest people you would meet. He's someone you can open up to anytime about anything, right? Not just design, about life advice and all. And for the longest time, I actually did not realize how young he is, because when he speaks and when you talk to him, he's extremely mature. He has perspectives that are very grounded and informed, and which is what I always enjoy in people that I work with, right? Like it's always fun to talk to him. So meet him whenever you get a chance to, right? So
there you go, practice.
Yeah, so Siddharth is doing a lot of service to the community by making all these videos. These are not easy to make, right? These take a lot of effort, and a lot of planning goes in ensuring that they are of high production value. So reward him by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Spread this out to as many people as possible. Spread this out to new designers that are reaching out and want to learn how to make a career in design. So. And yeah, meet Siddharth whenever you get a chance to.
And like he said, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
All right, perfect. Yeah.
Thanks, man. This was awesome.
This was awesome. Yeah. It
brought back so many memories.